Okay, I'm here with Ryan Cragun, a sociologist at the University of Tampa. And I wanted to talk to Ryan about this recent article in the New York Times by Lauren Jackson called Americans Haven't Found a Satisfying Alternative to Religion. So Ryan, can you briefly tell us about the article? Like, what's the author's main point here?
Yeah, it's actually quite interesting. So Lauren was raised LDS, which is interesting because I was too. And then she left the church, right? So she left the religion. And then she talks about in there how she spent the intervening years kind of exploring, trying to find meaning and purpose and satisfaction and happiness and health and all of these things kind of outside of religion. And then what she kind of concludes in this article is that she's not really satisfied. And she kind of feels like she's not alone in this, that there are lots of people who have left religion. So she's recognizing that religiosity has declined. She's also suggesting that she's not alone in this, that there are lots of people who have left religion. And she kind of gets this sense of like lots of the people who don't have religion are dissatisfied, that they're seeking something, that they don't feel like they've found what it is they're looking for outside of religion. And so she then starts to insinuate, like, maybe we dismissed religion too quickly. Maybe there are benefits. And really, at the heart of this article is this assumption that, like, religion or something about religion is like a core part of what makes us human. And if we take religion out, then we have to replace exactly that. And so she starts talking about like different ways that we can replace exactly what religion has done for humanity. Um, and of course, there are all sorts of problems with that, which I think we're going to talk about.
Right, yeah. So this is NCF Reacts. So tell us like what was your reaction to the article? Like what is your kind of critique of it?
Yeah, there are many, right? But I'll break them up into kind of two, maybe three pieces here as we go through this. So the first one is it's a bit of a sampling issue, and I hate to get wonky and methodological, but it's useful to kind of just recognize this. We have a phenomenon that we call sampling on the dependent variable when we're wrestling with these ideas, and it's basically if the author wanted to understand what life is like for the non-religious, the ideal approach would be to get a representative sample of all non-religious people. She didn't do that, right? What she did instead is she went looking for non-religious people who seemed dissatisfied and like wanting something else, and then she interviewed a whole bunch of them and she's like, look, all of these non-religious people aren't happy. They're not satisfied. And it's like, well, yeah, because you sampled on the dependent variable. This is akin to, and I wrote something up about this. It's akin to saying like, I want to study soccer fans, but you only look for hooligans, right? And then when you only find these hooligans, you're like, see, I knew it. All soccer fans are hooligans, right? And it's like, no, you went and looked for hooligans, and it turns out you found the hooligans. So she went looking for non-religious people who are dissatisfied and unhappy, and guess what she found? Non-religious people are dissatisfied and unhappy. So the first major problem with her approach is that and to give her like full credit, she does say like there are a lot of non-religious people who are perfectly fine, but then she immediately blows past it. It's like one sentence in this very long essay, and then she's like, "But look at all of the non-religious people who aren't," and I'm like, ah, okay, well that's a problem, right? You sampled on the dependent variable, so that's problem number one. Problem number two is this idea that somehow non-religious people aren't as happy or satisfied as religious people. There are a couple of really easy rebuttals to this, but then there are like the more methodologically rigorous ones. So the first thing that I pointed out is if you look at and I don't necessarily love the studies, but if you look at the studies for like world happiness indicators, and they rank countries by how happy people say they are, consistently the happiest countries on the planet are also the least religious countries. That factors nowhere into her essay. She ignores the clear data suggesting that you can be not particularly religious and quite happy. Um, so I think that is really problematic that she just like dismisses this, Nordic countries, which consistently rate as the highest and happiest countries on the planet. But on top, like in addition to that, the research suggesting that religious people are happier or healthier or have more meaning or purpose is deeply flawed in a very, I mean, I don't want to say it's a simple way because it confuses lots of people. And I should give like this little brief side example. I've got this person who read that article and then has been emailing me back and forth. And they're a layperson, they're not a scholar. And they're wondering, they're like, but all the research that I keep seeing from Pew and Gallup and all of these studies in that New York Times article all suggest that religious people are healthier and happier. And I was like, okay, let's unpack what's actually going on here. And I like to use an example to illustrate this. So what we're dealing with is statistical significance versus practical significance. The example that I use to help people understand this is imagine that you're playing the lottery. I'm not encouraging people to play the lottery, but imagine that you are, okay? Winning the lottery is like finding that something is statistically significant, okay? So you found that there's a statistically significant result. Great, you won the lottery. But the more important question is how much did you win? Okay. If you only win $20, does it really matter? Is this life changing? Should anybody change their life because they won $20 in the lottery? Or did you win, $500 million in a Mega Millions jackpot? That's very different. And what almost every single one of these studies that claims differences based on religiosity in terms of health or happiness or any of these other things, what they're doing is they're winning the lottery, but they're winning $20. So they found something that's statistically significant. But when you look at effect sizes, which is the practical significance, they're negligible. They are so small that any reasonable person would be like, that doesn't mean anything. This is completely meaningless. But a lot of people get confused by it because they don't know the difference between the two. They're like, oh, you won the lottery. Congratulations. This makes a huge difference. And it turns out, no, it doesn't. It makes no difference whatsoever. And all of the studies that Lauren Jackson cites in that piece, every single one of them is subject to this criticism. They're reporting statistically significant results, but they're ignoring the effect sizes. Many of those papers don't even report effect sizes, which I would argue is actually scholarly malpractice, right? Like you shouldn't be allowed to publish papers if you don't address both sides of this. But most of them are by like Harvard researchers who are hiding their effect sizes in big complicated analyses and saying, oh, religion matters, but never actually saying how much it matters. So I think that's like the big major problem here. And then there's one last final criticism, which is this kind of baseline assumption that somehow religiosity is core to who we are as humans. Um, I like to increasingly, I'm trying to get people to flip this around and recognize what's actually going on here. Humans invented religion. Okay. Religion didn't invent humans. So we've reversed the causality and we need to recognize what's actually going on. Humans invent religion. That's perfectly fine. That's not even questioned. Okay. Now you can debate divinity and like divine beings, like that's fine. If you want to debate that, that's fine. But religious institutions are human constructs, they're social constructs. There's no question about this. They've existed for thousands of years. And during that time, they've evolved. Um, Out of kind of self maintenance, if they want to continue to exist, they have to meet certain human needs and desires and wants. I'm totally granting that they're really good at this because they've evolved to do that very thing. But it doesn't mean that those desires and wants and needs that humans have are innately religious. Where I would flip that around is I would say those are actually human wants, desires, and needs. We have those. Religion can fulfill them, but there are many other ways that we can fulfill these wants, desires, and needs. There's no reason that we have to go through religion. Religion has just co opted this space and is trying to make this argument like you have to get this through religion, and Lauren Jackson doesn't seem to recognize this. She's bought into this narrative that at some level we are innately religious, when in fact, no, we're innately human. We have human desires, we have human wants, we have human needs, and we can fulfill them in lots of ways. Religion is really good at kind of packaging them all up and saying, here you go, done. And that's really not the way that we should be thinking about this.
Yeah. And just to kind of pick up on that last point, um, well, what do we know about like how non-religious people find meaning or find community, like how they do these kind of things that maybe religion has traditionally fulfilled, I suppose.
Sure, it's a great question. So when it comes to things like meaning, we'll unpack meaning here for a second. meaning is really tricky because it is kind of one of those areas that I like described a little bit earlier, where if you're looking at practical versus statistical significance, it doesn't have huge effects on most other outcomes. But one of the big differences between non-religious people and religious people is their source of meaning, where they derive it. Most non religious people will immediately say there's no inherent meaning to life. Okay. Whereas religious people are like, oh, no, no, they're like, my religion says that there is inherent meaning. So you see this distinction. But what non religious people then turn around and do is say, if you want meaning, you have to create it. And so it's not like there are massive differences in perceptions of meaning in terms of like how much meaning my life has. It's just the source of the meaning. Non-religious people recognize that they're creating their own meaning by whatever it is they decide to do, whether it's in their family, whether it's in their jobs, whether it's in their art, whether it, wherever they're finding it, they're deriving meaning and they know they're constructing it. Religious people, on the other hand, are kind of seeing inherent meaning in life and existence in the universe because of some divine entity or because of their religion. So it's not like there are radical differences in how much meaning people have. It's just non-religious people recognize they're creating it for themselves. So I think that's the huge difference that we really find between the two groups there.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Any final thoughts on the article or this topic in general?
Uh, yeah, it's fun. You know, I do want to be as fair as possible and recognize that there are absolutely, this is tricky, non-religious people, but also religious people. They're ignored in this, right? But there are lots of people who I think struggle with a sense of purpose, with a sense of connection, not feeling part of a community. A lot of countries are kind of arguing, I hate the language, right, that we're in an epidemic of loneliness. Um, I don't like calling it epidemic because like we actually went through a real epidemic, right? So I'm a little wary there, but I do think it's a genuine problem. So I'm not trying to minimize it. I just am wary about the language. So I do think that people struggle with these issues, and I think it's perfectly fine to wrestle with them and wonder like what can we do to address this? I just am really wary to immediately say, oh, well, there's this big change that's happening in society. People are leaving religion. That must be the cause of it, right? And that's not true, right? Correlation is not causation. Everybody should be aware of this. Um, the rate at which the non-religious has increased in the US and the time period in which that's happened coincided with the rise of the use of the internet. So there are a bunch of scholars out there who are like, oh, look, there's a correlation between it must mean that using the internet leads people to leave religion. It's like, actually, no, that's just patently false. All you have to do is look at other countries that did this earlier, and they did it during a period where there was no internet, right? So internet is not the cause, right? We need to be very careful about like linking these types of things together. So just because non-religion is increasing in the US and so is loneliness, doesn't mean that one is causing the other. Those are they're happening at the same time because of a lot of different things that are happening in society. And we what we should be trying to do is look for solutions to this and bigger, deeper causes instead of immediately having like a knee-jerk reaction and saying, oh, it's religion. We all need to go back to religion. It's not a credible approach. I think it's deeply flawed and deeply problematic, and it continues to privilege the position of religion in society when there's no reason to do that.
All right. Thanks so much, Ryan. It's great getting your thoughts about this article.
My pleasure.